woman song. The song was written by Anishinaabe Jaganosh women who were in the prison for women in Ontario during the 1970s. And the song was written to help them as they were going through prison and to give them support during the incredible injustices that they were going through, as well as to honor all those women. And a lot of the women did not make it out of there. So this song is a very strong song to support all women and to give you support in those times that are of struggle. So here is the Strong Woman song. Way ya, way ya, hey ho. Way ya, hey ho. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, ho, way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, hey ho. Way ya, hey ho. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, ho, way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, ho, way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, hey yo. Way ya, hey yo. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, ho, way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, ho, way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, hey yo. Way ya, hey yo. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, ho, way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, hey hi yo. Way ya, ho, way ya, hey hi yo. Ho.
Thank you, Nizhoni Ellwood from the NezPerce and Apache tribes. That was a beautiful song. We would like to acknowledge the tribes of the local area here in San Diego, the Luiseño, the Kumeyaay, the Kupa, and all the indigenous people, the intertribal people. And I would like to say a blessing, asking permission that we come in a good way with open hearts in my mother's language. Hatsi, Jimanji, Tatiui, Kumamati, Goho, Mahui, Nanazana, Kumami Kochadi, Dunti, Di, Kumamati, Kumami Kochadi. Basically, what I've just asked for is I said, hello and thank you. We love you, Creator. And for all the four directions, Mother Earth, the moon, we give you our heart. Thank you very much, Creator. And in this way, we go forward. Thank you.
Muted, yeah. Hi, Steff. Thank you so much for your prayer. And Steff is from the Nhanho Pueblo tribe, and she's a natural healer. And if Steff is, well, I was going to have Steff today is Indigenous Day, and we'd like to once again honor the land on which we are and to honor the resiliency and the sacrifices and the idea that we still have an opportunity to speak with people and to learn about traditional ways of doing things. Steff, would you like to add anything to?
Yes, as some of you may know that a lot of the states and a lot of the people have recognized Indigenous Peoples Day. This arose because of Columbus Day. Columbus and a lot of the other people that have come here and all their atrocities and all the horrible things that they've done to the Indigenous peoples. 90% of our population is gone, and we would like to honor Indigenous peoples, not just this day, but every day. For every time you step foot upon Mother Earth, you are on Indigenous land. So we pay tribute to them, for the ancestors of the past, the present, and the future. We go forth in a good way.
And thank you once again, Steff, and thank you for sharing with us. And my name is Sue Alderson, and I'm one of the co-founders of the North County San Diego Women's March. And this year, every year we have a theme, and this year our theme happens to be reproductive justice. And we had decided to do this before we knew the case that was going to be before the Supreme Court regarding Roe v. Wade. And we have looked at the idea of reproductive justice as a broader category, that we realize that there might be reproductive rights, but not everybody has access to the rights that they're given. And so in order to ensure that all who identify as women and all who are in need of reproductive rights are able to access them, and so we continue to look at reproductive justice. And so this year, that's the theme for the North County San Diego Women's March. And so in order to carry us forward, today we're going to have Kate McGlynn, and she just graduated from law school, and she's waiting for the results of her bar exam. And we're so excited because she's going to soon be an attorney in San Diego, because it's the most difficult bar in the world, from what I understand. After that, we're going to have Aleena Nawabi, and she's a policy advocate for CAIR, and she's going to speak to issues of reproductive justice in the Muslim community. And after that, we're going to have Annika Cowen, and she's going to be our person that's going to moderate a discussion. Thank you, Annika. We love your shirt. And she's going to moderate the conversation around reproductive justice and the impact on the BIPOC community. And in that circle, we're going to have Fierro Ruiz, and she's a policy and advocacy coordinator of United We Dream. And when Kahleia has a chance, if she's still in school, to join us, then she'll be a part of that roundtable discussion. So that's what we have in store for us tonight. I'm really excited. I mean, I've heard part of what Kate has to say about the history of Roe v. Wade. When she was talking to me about what she had discovered, there's so much information that's real information or factual information, and then so much that we're looking at that's just like misinformation. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Kate and let Kate share with us what you know about the history, what it was, and where we are, and where we might be going. Can't hear you. Hey, Kate, I think, Kate, you're muted. Right, and I don't know that you can unmute or if Kelly has to unmute you. Talk to me. I think you're still muted. I don't have access to do that.
Hi, Kate. Let's see if we can get you on here.
Thank you.
I have you unmuted on my end. Can you speak again, babe? We had you unmuted before. I'm not quite sure. Let me turn up your volume, maybe. Edit mic settings. You want to talk?
What about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Kelly.
All
Is it
right.
still going?
You're good. You're good. So you're going to have to start at the beginning, though. Okay, Miha? From the beginning.
No problem. Okay.
Right.
So sorry about all that. I wanted to make sure that I gave Roe v. Wade the background rather than since Roe v. Wade. So the bulk of what I'll be speaking about is leading up to that, because the context is really enlightening, I think. So contraceptives and abortion are not modern day concepts. Family planning has been an integral part of society since ancient times. In order to provide a clear picture of how we got to Roe v. Wade, we need to look at it in historical context. Focusing on reproductive justice and the rights in an American context only, we must begin with the Native Americans. So prior to colonization, there were roughly 100 million Indigenous people living in the Americas. So it's impossible to generalize beliefs for such a vast amount of people. So when I speak about beliefs, I'm going to be speaking about, I'll be referencing specific societies rather than overall. So traditional Iroquois societies discouraged abortion due to their steadfast beliefs in children's rights to adequate food, clothing, and shelter, and that each child was considered a blessing from the Creator. With that mindset, if an Iroquois woman found herself in a social or economic circumstance that would hinder a child's happiness or well-being, the woman would have direct access to plants which would terminate pregnancy. Such actions were known to have been taken when Native people were confronted by Spanish invaders, and it was reasoned that it was better to send the embryo back to the Creator where it might be reborn in other circumstances rather than be subject to rape, mutilation, or slavery. So when from colonization to the 1800s, even Puritan settlers at the time abortions were allowed prior to quickening. Not only was it legal, but it was common enough that it was documented in medical records. In 1821, was the first abortion law that came out. It came out of Connecticut, and it only banned apothecaries from selling abortion-inducing poisons. This law was not morally founded in any way, but rather out of concern for poisoning. And it wasn't until a Comstock Acts of 1873 that laws were put in place banning, limiting birth control. So in the 1860s, was the first law making abortion illegal before quickening. And in 1869 is when the Catholic Church made abortion after conception a sin. So there's conflicting accounts of the perception of pre-quickening, pre-quickening being before the woman could feel the baby move. Abortion in the Catholic teachings, there's conflicting accounts, but there was a distinction between the formed and unformed fetuses dating back to at least the 4th or 5th centuries. And it was the Catholics' belief that life did not exist before quickening. So that was prior to ensoulment, which is why it wasn't a sin for abortion prior to quickening, right? Because the embryo didn't have a soul at that point. In the mid 1800s, was the Victorian era. The mid 1800s to 1910 was the Victorian era. So by this time, abortion, except to save a mother's life, was criminal in almost every state. During the Victorian era, Americans thought abortion was, the mindset was that abortion was a problem brought on by white upper class women who were choosing to start families later and or limiting their family sizes. Increased female independence was also perceived as a threat to male power and patriarchy, especially as Victorian women increasingly volunteered outside of the home for religious and charitable causes. This change, there was also an attack by the male-dominated scientific community at the time that wanted to assert authority over irregular doctors, such as homeopaths and midwives. For the most part, persons who performed all manner of reproductive health care were women at the time. They were female midwives. Midwives were interracial. Half of the women were who provided reproductive health care were Black women. Other midwives were Indigenous and white. And something to note here was that the scientific community sought to change the dynamic around reproductive care, and how it, prior to that, it had been this more homeopathic midwife procedures, but the scientific community wanted to make a profit off of it, naturally. So the white male-dominated field in the scientific community decided that it was surgical, and decided to take it in that route, and basically used all of the historical procedures and everything, but made it, for financial gain. The white supremacy mindset was a dominant factor during this time as well. White men were concerned with the shifting ethnic and racial dynamics in the United States, worrying that the low birth rate of white upper class women would lead to racial inferiors and immigrants overrunning the country. The Page Act of 1873 restricted Chinese women from entering the United States, and was founded on these same white supremacist ideals. They were supported, and they urged white women to spread their loins across the nation in response to a perceived threat of too many Black and Asian people in the United States. The Victorian anti-abortion movement portrayed women who terminated their pregnancies as unnatural and selfish, undermining the expected patriotic and godly role of the American woman, which was that of the wife and mother. In the Great Depression of the 1920s to 1940s, abortion became an economic decision, and many women sought illegal and dangerous abortions because they simply could not afford to feed an additional child. During the 1950s to 1960s, somewhere between 200,000 and 1.2 million illegal abortions were conducted annually. That number is so different because there were no records, because it was being done, and not reported. In the 1960s, this brought the women's liberation movement, and reproductive rights were at the core. A study of low-income women in New York City was conducted in the 1960s, and of those who had attempted an abortion, 77% said they attempted a self-induced procedure, and only 2% said that a physician had been involved in any way. Then, in 1964, there was the rubella outbreak, which posed significant dangers to unborn children, and that changed the conversation about abortion, and things began to change. In that same year, reported illegal abortions accounted for 17% of deaths attributed to pregnancy and childbirth. Again, that number was likely much higher because it wasn't reported. The first case stemming from this new wave of thought was Griswold v. Connecticut in 1965. This was an appeal of the criminal conviction of the director of Planned Parenthood for providing contraceptives to married couples. And the Supreme Court found that the state law criminalizing the use of birth control violated a couple's right to privacy. So that's the first time we're seeing the Supreme Court apply privacy to reproductive rights. In 1970, Hawaii became the first state to allow abortions at the request of a woman. Around this time, states began amending their laws and creating some exceptions. In the 1970s, okay, now this is important because as we're seeing all this change, where society is just now decriminalizing contraceptives and birth control, not just abortions. At the same time, we're seeing Canada and the US federal government carried out forced sterilizations of 25 to 42% of Native American women deemed of childbearing age. While this practice is no longer promoted, it has never been disbanded by law, and Native American women in the US are still reporting having their tubes tied after childbirth without their consent. So at the same time, society is saying, you know, we're just coming off of this, birth control is not allowed. We're at the same time sterilizing Native American women, right? So it's not a matter of whether this is a religious stance or you know, it's good for society. It's just one-sided, right? And then we go to Eisenstadt v. Baird, which is a 1972 Supreme Court case, which applied the principles in Griswold to single people. And then we finally get to Roe v. Wade in 1973, which is when Roe was decided, 30 states still made abortion illegal, and 20 states made it legal under various circumstances. So Roe made it legal across all 50 states to obtain abortion in the first trimester. I can open it up if you want.
That would be great. Oh my gosh, Kate, you learned, I think I just learned so much, right? So I can only imagine. So tell me the most interesting thing that you learned.
For me, I just think that if you look at it in a timeline, which I know is a little, I don't want to say boring, but essential, because you're seeing that the narrative around abortion is very much not controlled, but dominated by the Catholic Church and by religious underpinnings. But the reality is that it's political, right? When white men decided that abortion was not allowed, that's what happened. And then religion followed. When society said that that birth control was illegal, 5 years before, 2 years before, we at the same time our government was sterilizing Native Americans.
The hypocrisy is confounding, right? The white supremacist ideology is so prevalent. The conversation just around issues of abortion mirror the conversations around immigration in the United States. So much of it is intertwined, right, with this ideology about what you're supposed to look like and be like if you're a member of the United States community. Does anybody else have any questions or comments to add to? Kate, you did an incredible job. It's just this amazing idea, the idea of taking something that's natural. Women, I don't know how long women have been having babies. I would think from time immemorial, and all of a sudden we're going to reframe a process that's just natural of how you have babies and turn it into something that's surgical and medical and create an environment where you're sick because you're supposed to go to a hospital, right? Does anybody else have any comments or questions for Kate? None? All right. Last I heard personally of forced sterilization was, I don't know, somebody could tell me the timeline. I'm going to think it was like 6 months ago. It was before Biden was elected, and that there were some women that were in detention in California, and they ended up having forced hysterectomies, of which they had no idea even why they had any surgery. So with that, thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for the information you gave us. Thank you for that background. One thing we all need to remember is that Roe v. Wade was founded on the right to privacy. And that's what they talk about. None of this other kinds of convoluted conversation. And throughout from Roe v. Wade, and I think it was like around 7 or 8 years later, when the Tea Party, I think, got involved and evangelical movement got involved, all of a sudden it became a question of religion. So we're conflating the separation of church and state. And in this whole conversation, it's an interesting dynamic to me that we have taken the idea of reproductive rights and your most personal decision that you can possibly make about yourself. And it's your own personal decision that does not impact anybody but you, and have turned it into a public conversation. So once again, I want to thank Kate so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You did a wonderful job. And with that, I think it's time for Miss Aleena June to join us. And again, Aleena June Nawabi is a policy advocate for CAIR. And Aleena, do you want to have a conversation, or how would you like us to do? How would you like this to go for you?
I'm happy either way.
Okay, you start, and I'll sit in. And if I have any questions, I'll just raise my hand. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, so today I'm actually going over the unfortunate Muslim culture, which is separate from the Muslim religion. Um, the issues that the Muslim culture faces is a lot of patriarchy and misogyny. A lot of the things that Karen actually went over. Unfortunately, it is incorporated into a lot of family issues. For example, when we speak about reproductive rights, the subject matter circles around the right to an abortion, the right to receive contraception at no cost, the right to identity beyond misogynistic titles. When I think about the women in my life and their struggles with reproductive rights, there are so many different aspects. For example, mothers who are forced to have several children, 11 children. For example, my mom, she had 11 children. She had several miscarriages. Unfortunately, my father and a lot of these mothers' spouses, they don't know the toll that it takes on a pregnant woman's body and the toll that it takes on a person's health when they go through pregnancy. And this is a big issue with a lot of women. They don't seem to have access to contraceptives, or they don't have the education, and their spouse is not very helpful either. And then the other issue that I have been surrounded with are young girls who are forced into becoming child brides. They're forced by their families, they're forced by the society that kind of, creates that you have to get married. You have to be you have to be in a relationship. Even like the movies that they're exposed to, for example, Bollywood has always been a huge issue for a lot of Muslim cultures, because Bollywood talks about love, 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 running away at a very young age, very irresponsible, not actually talking about the issues that women will face at a young age. They usually end up in very abusive relationship, in a very controlled relationship, and unfortunately, they don't receive the help from their family. Instead, their family tells them, "Well, you're married now. You're your husband's property." And again, this is a culture that's very abusive towards young women. The third issue that a lot of the young woman faces is the identity, who carries the burden of infertility like a crime, her life and thought revolving around not being able to becoming a mother. And it is like a shame for not only the young woman, but also somehow for the family too. They put a lot of pressure on the woman, saying, "Why aren't you not getting pregnant? What is wrong with you?" As if something is wrong with the person. Without a child, you're nothing. And then the other thing that these young women face is the fear of losing their spouse, someone abandoning them because they're not doing their job, as if the job is to have children. Everywhere you look, it's the same information, whether it's the culture or the society. Everything plugs in saying a woman is worth how much she can bring, how many children she can bring. And around the world, there are so many painful, humiliating, and traumatic demons that women face, such as genital mutilation, virginity test, rape by the hands of their spouse. I mean, recently in the state of California, we just passed a bill, or at least in the Democratic Party, we support a bill that prevents rape by the hands of spouse. And this is just happening in California. Imagine what's happening in the houses, where no one is responsible. It seems like there is no responsibility that takes place. So with the Muslim culture, there just seems to be the fight for reproductive, right? The health boils down to having control over your health, your safety, and identity. And a lot of the women, they lack that. They lack the support even from their own female community. So those are the things that the Muslim culture, unfortunately, kind of perpetrates.
So Aleena, June, thank you very much. And it does, there are a couple of ideas that come to mind. And so because what you speak of talks about women as property. It's
Right.
that idea that the sense of personal autonomy is not part of the cultural idea around women and men in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So embedded in that, then a woman never has the right to choose not to have a child if she's in a relationship with a man.
Right. It
You don't,
seems
there's
like
something, I mean, then there's this whole shame factor and there's whole, like, there's something wrong with you kind of idea, right?
Mhm.
And so what I do have a question. So, because you raised so many interesting points, you talked about genital mutilation, which is illegal in the United States, but I've done work in it. I think that it still occurs. The whole idea, like that men have the right to rape their women, and how difficult it's real difficult to talk about rape when it's not your spouse. I can only imagine what it's like to turn around and have that conversation, which is going to bring me to the point, and I will talk about Domestic Violence Month in a second. And then just the whole idea of contraception. So given those points, when we look at things like contraception and the ability to have autonomy over your own body, what kind of recommendations do you have, or do you think would be appropriate, or people would hear, or how would you deliver them?
I think education is the key for anything. I think
Mm-hmm.
we need to provide services beyond what you prescribe on a piece of note. I really believe that eventually this is something that states have to start looking into too. When people start having children, do they have the capacity? Do they have the resources they need to have children? Because you're bringing in children, you're bringing a whole world into a world. You want to make sure this child has everything they need to be healthy and safe, as well as the environment. I'm hoping that eventually this is something that the healthcare can start looking into, providing services, how to raise children, even taking classes like child development classes. I know I took it in Miramar College. It was one of the most beneficial classes I have ever taken. I learned how to communicate with my nephew and nieces. I have 34 nephew and nieces. I finally learned how to speak to them. I thought I knew everything about kids, but turns out I didn't know anything. I learned how to be more effective as a grown up and as an aunt, and just it brought me closer to them and them as well to me. And this is the thing that I learned from those classes. It's that you don't need to be a parent to have that relationship. You could be a teacher, you could be a
Mm-hmm.
community leader, an organizer, just a person, a neighbor, and that's the thing that these folks needs education, classes, courses on how to raise children. What are the options? Do you really need to have a child?
Right,
Can you actually adopt a child? And is it healthy for you? Can you physically have a
right.
child? A lot of folks who can't have children, I always wonder, maybe it's not for you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this cultural thing where, you have to have your own. It's really, I don't know. I don't like it. I don't
Right,
know the word for it. I just don't like it. Like, what's so good about your blood that you have to have constantly, growing bloodline when there are so many children that need care and nurture just as much as a child that's not born yet? You
right,
can adopt and give that same level of love and have that same level of relationship. Just like I said, with my own nephew and nieces, with the students I've had, because I
mm-hmm.
took those classes.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Actually, when you said your mom was pregnant 11 times and had some miscarriages, I was exhausted. Me personally,
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, how many months of her life did she spend having children? And then how easy was it, or not easy, for her to be able to provide undivided attention to 11 children? I mean, the needs, like you learned, are so different from the newborn to the person who's like 13 or 14, right? And
Exactly.
so I do have another question. So let's say we take on this whole thing about education. So we have the second generation of members of the Muslim community, the Muslim culture living in the United States, and they tend to start thinking more along the line like you're thinking. Will that be a difficult transformation for young women, particularly, that start thinking like, I'm not really sure I want to have 11 children? I'm not really sure I want to have any children. I'd like to have children where I can plan when I'm going to have the child. Will that be, I mean, how difficult, if that's the kind of education you're speaking about providing, how difficult will it be to have people accept that?
I don't think it will be difficult at all. I
Okay.
think people are already starting to educate themselves independently. Even, for example, Afghanistan, right, where a woman right now doesn't even have the right to step outside the house.
Right.
They don't want to have too many children because they believe that physically they can't have it. It has a negative impact on their bodies. Number one, and number two, they don't have the patience to raise the children in a society where they can't even raise their children. They don't have the right over their children. So it's the same thing with the U.S. too. When you think about United States, do you really have full right over your child? Once they go to school, they're learning things that you have no control over. They come home with everything like that. So it's just education. It doesn't mean that you're preventing people from having children. You're actually educating them on to have children in a very safe environment. Whether they have a lot of children or less children or not having children, that is a decision that they have to make based on their health and their needs.
That's good. Does anybody else have any questions? Any comments? Hi, Kahleia. It's the whole cultural implication and the whole idea of women as property is mind-boggling to me, and it just sounds pervasive. It sounds like it's a pervasive idea that there's this almost level of I call it disdain, and some folks have said, "Oh, Sue, you're way too crude about that," but that opportunity for us to be able to have autonomy over our bodies and to make these choices, whatever the choices are, they're going to be personal choices and not be ostracized for making those choices. Miss Aleena June, thank you so much. I mean, that was just fascinating. Is there anything else you'd like to add? It's like there's so much to learn and so many opportunities. Do you have a specific ask for
I do.
us right here so that we can also help providing support or whatever?
Yes, I did touch up on Afghan women rights. I think what's happening in Afghanistan, it's terrible, especially to women. And I'm hoping that with the Women's March, we can actually incorporate some policies that would support not only women in the U.S., but around the world, especially women in Afghanistan. I feel like 20 years of progress has just gone down the drain. I know several women that refused to get married or start a family because they wanted to pursue education, get into law school, engineering, and now they feel like their entire future is burned to the ground because of the transition in government. So I'm hoping the Women's March can support us in this and start making some noise, good trouble, that would support the women as well over there.
Right. Well, we will be glad to, and we're going to be having a meeting with Aleena June to find out the ways we can start supporting Afghan women in the United States, in California, the United States, and Afghanistan. And the one thing that we will touch on at another time is the mental health component of women who don't have control or a choice over what they want to do with their bodies. That there's a huge cost in terms of mental health issues that we have to face. Aleena June touched on it, and so did Kate. I do need to remind people this is Domestic Violence Month, and that when we look at the perpetrators of domestic violence, when they have access to guns, they're pretty much inclined, many, to kill their partners. And we see a disproportionate number of this in the BIPOC community. And so what we would like to see happen, if you could get in touch with your Congress people, whether it's Mike Levin or whoever we need to get in touch with, and please ask them to do whatever they can to pass the Violence Against Women Act. And so we need to make sure that women are safe, and that when they're in those situations, that their ability to live their lives and not be in fear that if they say the wrong thing or they don't agree with whatever the husband or the partner or the boyfriend or whoever the abuser is, that they're not going to be killed. So that's just a reminder. And with this, I would like to turn our conversation over to Annika Cowen, the friend of the North County San Diego Women's March. And I'm going to let them kind of take it because she's going to be with Kahleia. I just saw that Kahleia is present, and Karen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Annika. And thank you very much, Annika. And thank you so much, Aleena June, for your fabulous information. And if you want to get involved with the Afghan women and support in any way, please get in touch with us, and we'll be able to include you in whatever our meetings are and decisions are. All right, thank you. And Miss Annika.
Hello, everybody. My name is Annika. And the first thing that I want to do is take a minute to kind of introduce the people that I'm sharing my space with tonight. So I will go first. We're going to do our names, our pronouns, what we're doing currently, and something that's bringing us joy. So as I said, my name is Annika. I use they, she pronouns, and I do identify as non-binary. What am I doing currently? I moved to San Diego recently, and I am starting a job shortly that is an after-school program in Barrio Logan. And something that's bringing me joy currently is that I am in a space where I am setting up and developing new routines and finding my practices that help me build peace and help me build restfulness into my life. So who would like to go next?
Thank you, Annika. Hi, everyone. It's great to share space with you all. And for those who will be watching this after the recording, my name is Fierro Ruiz. I use she, her pronouns. I am queer, undocumented, and unafraid. I am also the policy advocacy coordinator for United We Dream and have been doing immigrant rights work since the age of 15. And so very excited to share the space with you all. What brings me joy is being in spaces like this and getting to talk about real issues that are things that we don't necessarily talk about every day, but we experience every day. And so excited to join you today.
Hey everyone, my name is Kahleia. I use she, they pronouns. I'm currently residing in Oceanside, and right now I am working in my school to kind of bring teen awareness to social issues going on in our communities. And something that's joy right now is being able to take such a leadership position as a teenager and being able to use my voice to make change. So yeah.
All right. So the first thing that I want to talk through and also put a name on, as we sort of mentioned, is that it is Indigenous Peoples Day. And, you know, reminder, like one of the things that I think is important to bring into the space today and just something to talk through is, you know, Columbus first landed in what is known currently as present-day Puerto Rico with the Taino people, and to see the lasting impacts of something as harmful as colonization. Puerto Rico currently, a good portion of the country does not have power, and the US is 100% responsible and wrapped up in this. Some other things that I do want to put a name on is that, interestingly enough, Columbus was never formally in what's now considered the United States. So remember that if we talk about Columbus, to talk about, you know, the areas that he was, that is not to give space to the other harm, oppression, and colonization that occurred specifically within America. And to also remember to include Black folks in Indigenous Peoples Days. This is vast. So the next thing I would like to do is set our intentions for this space. Whenever we have dialogue, it's important to set intentions around how we all want to show up together. So the first thing I kind of want to talk through is this idea of step up and step back. So if you're a person who normally talks a lot, then please try to step up your listening skills and step back your talking. If you're a person who stays quiet, we will never push you to, you know, obviously engage, but we do want to hear from everybody. So this includes things like letting the silence sit is kind of what we say, and seeing if there's anybody else who would like to participate. And more specifically for white individuals, we ask that you hold space and kind of lower your voices a little bit for this space. The next thing that we'll want to say that's a really good one is what's shared here stays here, but what's learned here leaves here. So if somebody feels comfortable sharing a personal lived experience, that does not mean that their story gets to, you know, travel outside of this space. But the idea of what's learned here, we encourage you to keep that with you and keep that moving forward. Along with that, I also want to say that, you know, we never want to have to encourage anybody to share their trauma to get a point across. The next thing I want to bring into this space is the idea that this is a brave space. So we do encourage people to, you know, say how you feel. Along with that, you will be held accountable for your words. A brave space is a little bit different than a safe space because it merely focuses on that point and that component of accountability, because sometimes we are ignorant and we say things and we don't mean to cause harm. That doesn't mean it's not harmful. So we will be accountable for our words, our actions, and how we're showing up. And the next thing that I want to do is give a general trigger warning that we hope to provide an open space for critical exchange of ideas and perspectives. Some of our talks will include topics that some individuals might find offensive and more traumatizing. We hope to create an atmosphere of mutual respect, and we ask that if you need to step away at any point for any reason because something is triggering, to please do that and prioritize taking care of yourself, of course. And the final thing that I want to do before we move into our dialogue is just take a minute to do a grounding exercise. So if you're present, I would ask that you take a moment to get comfortable wherever you are. If that means you need to get up and go on the couch or your bed or whatever that is, I ask that you do that. And if you're able to place your feet on the ground and your hands wherever they're comfortable. I have mine on my thighs currently. And the reason we're doing this is because a lot of the topics we just talked about are very heavy and difficult things to hear. And I feel like a lot of the time we kind of just whoosh by very heavy topics because we're desensitized to them. The reality of the situation, though, is that our bodies hold everything. So when we talk about things like reproductive justice, things that impact us as people who reproduce, there's probably some tension in your body that you don't even realize that you're unconsciously holding. So I ask that you close your eyes and focus on your breathing. So we'll go in, 2, 3, hold for 3 seconds. Out, 2, 3. We'll do a few more of those. So in, 2, 3. Hold for 3 seconds. Out, 2, 3. One more. In, 2, 3. Hold. Out, 2, 3. And I want you to keep your eyes closed and focus where in your body you're holding tension. And it might not even be from this talk tonight. It might be from your day. But to focus on that part of your body, to unclench your jaw and relax your shoulders and start to wiggle and just let yourself loosen a little bit. And see where you're holding tension and focus on that part of your body and send it a little bit of extra love and release it. It may take a few breaths. It may be done in one. But just focus on where your body is holding tension in your upper back, in your shoulders, in your legs. Move your toes around, see how they feel. And just do what you need to do to be a little bit more comfortable. Check your necks too. My neck's always super tight. Let's do one more inhale. Let's go inhale 1, 2, 3. Hold it. Exhale 1, 2, 3. Put your hands on your chest and your stomach and do one more inhale. Hold it. Exhale. And with that, I would like to pass it on to Karen for the next part of our section.
Thank you so much, Annika. Definitely getting us grounded is a very important part of making sure that we're all in this space present together. Kelly, if you could bring us all into the space, I do want to create this sort of as a roundtable conversation with all of us, not just the 3 of us, but all of us that are here, to really talk about how what we've learned so far and what we know about reproductive justice shows up in our lives. And so we have a set of 4 questions that revolve around the intersectionalities that we see about how it shows up in our body autonomy, how it shows up in our laws, and then finally how it shows up in our communities. I do want to mention or give space for folks who are younger and are coming into this space as amazing leaders to step into answering these questions first. But definitely open for everyone who's here to take part in this conversation. To kick that off, we know that reproductive justice impacts so many people with different realities, needs, and experiences. So my question for folks on this call is, what role does intersectionality play in reproductive justice that you've seen in your life? And I'll kick it off to whoever wants to go first. So what role does intersectionality play? So I can go first in terms of this. Reproductive justice, as someone who is undocumented, who grew up with a family who is all immigrants and experienced the healthcare system in different ways, reproductive justice shows up as what is the information and education that immigrant communities have in terms of what they're able to access around their reproductive, around the ability to pursue birth control, to pursue care in clinics. I know that growing up, my family didn't have health insurance, and going to the clinic was one of those things that only happened if you were like bleeding and there was no way to patch you up at home. And so the idea that I could easily go into a clinic and ask for birth control once that time of my life came to wasn't something that I necessarily felt comfortable with. And so I know that's an experience that a lot of other immigrant families have had with their relationship to reproductive justice. Sue, I know that you're speaking, but it sounds like you're on.
Am I muted? No, the volume is down, I think.
You're good. You can hear me.
All right. In my experience, reproductive rights is one thing, and we moved it to reproductive justice for the intersectionality because it was a reality that the rights were there but not afforded to undocumented people, to the BIPOC community, that availability and accessibility to medical care, to reproductive care has been scarce at best. And then through the years, as they have made other decisions, there are less and less opportunities for the BIPOC community who, by virtue of how life has been designed in the United States, tends to have not access because they don't have as much money and they don't have opportunities to pursue other kinds of avenues for an income stream that, like you talked about, Karen, the fear of the family going to a clinic because of whatever, were you going to be deported? Did you have enough money? Whatever the issues were at home. Mm-hmm. And as well as are those facilities available? Is it accessible? If you needed to, can you get there? Is there transportation to get you there? Who's going to take you? People can't not go to work and take their children, right? Women or whoever is of childbearing age and wants to have a child or doesn't want, how do they have that opportunity to eat if it's not there? And they have to get on a bus, they have to take a car, and they have to take a day off of work, and then they don't get paid. So the right to it might exist, but the accessibility and the justice component, I mean, that's kind of a real loose understanding and experience that I've had in terms of being able to access what it is we need in order to make decisions that meet our own personal needs and our own personal autonomy. Does that make any sense? And so the conversation is broader than just about rights, even though the rights is very, very important, but it's how we implement those. Right? Mm-hmm. Not to take up any space, but I've been thinking about this all day. So But that's just been experience when I work with young people. And I mean, it's like, how am I going to get to the dot? Who's going to get me there? I mean, there's so many other variables that other kids, oh yeah, hey mom, I need to go. And they say, okay, fine, I'll drive you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, versus what they talked about when, you know, Kate's talking about, oh, we just think we're just going to sterilize Indigenous women because we can, or we get women and we just kind of make these decisions. And so the whole concept of justice for women is an interest. It needs to be, for me, unpacked in a different way. And it's painful. It's a really painful conversation for many, many, many people.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And Kate learned all about it. She taught us all about some of that, right? But it's very difficult. And then what your sexuality is, I mean, there are just so many other conversations that kind of implode in our personal, most intimate decisions that we're going to ever make. Mm-hmm. That's my perception.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Sue, you do a really good job at kind of heading us into the direction of body autonomy and having a discussion around how much control do we have over our bodies. And so the guiding question that we had for this is, so the fight for reproductive justice magnifies the importance of bodily autonomy under patriarchy. Who do you think is making strides, laws, and systems to control our body? So who has been that major player in creating these laws that affect us in our lifetime?
Anybody can answer, right?
Yeah, anybody.
Can I just like say, okay, should we just popcorn it or whatever?
If I may step in to answer this. For me, kind of reaching in and learning about kind of the female reproductive system and rights and kind of the justice we have around that, I've always kind of thought about it like, how is this something that's being brought to a law basis where people have a whatever type of right to say, this is what we can and cannot do. And it always gets brought to me this attention that these are male-dominated spaces. Like, you go higher and higher and higher, and you see, of course, women are going gradually into it more, but it's male-dominated. And you see who's making such laws and who's saying such things and who's going against women who are women and people who can reproduce. And it's a crazy thought to say, why are you as a man, as someone who doesn't have a uterus, who cannot produce, deciding what we can and cannot do with our uterus, with what we have and what we can choose to do with it? That's just kind of my 2 cents around that.
Good job. Go on, Annika.
To build on what was just said, first of all, yes. To build on that, along with that, I think one of the important things we have to remember too is we just talked about Roe v. Wade and the long history. Like, these are structures that have been in place, and we know now that, like, we're getting a little bit of diversity, a little bit more representation from those who can reproduce. But when these laws were put in place, was that representation there? Not really. So that's a wild thought in and of itself. And to go back to your first question that we had around intersectionality, like, this whole topic needs to be sectioned. Like, intersectionality needs to be in the middle of this when we talk about it constantly. Because we look at what continues to happen. And even last summer or 2 summers ago, when Michigan and all these different types of states were having different laws around abortion, there were studies that came out around all these different Republican senators who had affairs in states where you were not able to get an abortion. And you know what happened? They flew that person to another state where you could get an abortion. So this has never been about controlling access of a whole people. It's controlling access specifically of Black, Brown, and Indigenous women. So, I mean, it goes very, very deeply back to the history. Like, again, going back to Puerto Rico, like, I can't remember if it was Kennedy or Reagan. Doesn't matter. Same energy.
A few people might disagree, but I got you, Annika. Yeah. I hear you.
There was intentional sterilization of Puerto Rican women, and it got to the point where it was up to about 1/3 of the population. And there is literal footage and clips saying They wanted this to happen because they did not want more Black and brown women. This has always been a white supremacist agenda that is being pushed, and the bodily autonomy that goes into this to make you think the deep, deep levels, to make you think that you don't deserve a choice, you don't deserve consent, you don't deserve a part in this, is a very deep structure that has continued to be built since the start of this country. Yes, I see Aleena June has something else to say. So,
Annika, to add to that, recently with the child separation, family separations at the border, most of the women who were put into these detention centers, they did illegal hysterectomy on them.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. This is it's kind of removing a woman's right or agency away from them. It's a form of a weapon.
It is a
They're
weapon.
they're harming the person's body, illegally performing these kinds of tasks on the bodies like that. Not only that, I remember reading a book about how the white population is decreasing, so we have to make sure we're increasing white population. And this is where this hate towards abortion came out. It's not because they want children, they love children. It's because of racism. They want to make sure they're the dominant population.
Right.
And but when you look at even myself, when I needed, my body needed some, had some health issues. So I went to a Planned Parenthood because I didn't have insurance. Luckily for me, I live in San Diego. I went there, they took care of me. I came home, I felt very comfortable. And then 3 months ago, I drove by the same Planned Parenthood because they have, Smash Burger right across the street. So I'm being very honest about my intentions. I see like there were 3 people protesting, and honestly, I felt really offended and angry because I didn't have insurance. I wasn't planning on getting pregnant or anything like that. I just needed to see a doctor that was giving me free services. I mean, Planned Parenthood is not just about women and reproductive. It's about other issues too, because our bodies are all connected to our reproductive system. So if one thing is wrong, there are other things wrong too. So I was so angry, like how, like we live in a country where we have free access to education, and then we have people like that protesting, where someone like me who didn't have insurance found security, safety, and health in Planned Parenthood. So it's very, very sad to see that kind of protest.
And absolutely. And I'm going to move us to the next question, which I promise you we'll also have a lot to talk about. But yeah, Aleena, thank you so much for that, because I didn't even think about population as being like population growth as being a reason why. So that definitely woke up my mind on that. But I did want to talk specifically now about, we do live in California. We do live in a state that has been, for the most part, progressive in terms of reproductive justice. So why is it important for us to protect the rights that many have fought for and died here as Californians?
What do you think, Kate? I mean, you did all this research, right? You know everything there is to know about the past to the present. And now you're going to be an attorney like next week when you get your bar results. But the connection between us, I'm going to just piggyback on Karen, and the idea like we're okay and we're safe in California, and therefore we can almost be blind to what's happening across the country, befuddles me personally. So I'm going to ask you what you think.
Well, so something I didn't get to was that the Hyde Amendment, which it's in 1976, and it's come into pretty much every financial decision that's come out of Congress, and it prevents any federal funds going toward abortion. And so when we talk about the fact that California is a protected space, basically, that's actually not incredibly true, because if we look at the reservations, their healthcare is basically federally funded, and so if federal funds can't reach the reservations, I'm sorry, if abortion funds aren't available to those on Indian reservations, there are no funds available. So you have, even inside California, you have these groups that don't have access. And so then you spread that even further to a national scale. And, I think that's where it comes into play that, we're not just California, and we're not just, Texas and, individual states. I really do think that that's this like Republican kind of mindset to be, these individual pockets, when it's just, national, global. I just can't see how we draw lines and say these people are with us and the rest aren't. I think it just has to be a larger scale.
It's almost like if one person is denied access, we're all denied access. Based on the whole philosophy. But Karen and everybody, I do have a question as we talk about this and this being safe. And I have to ask this question because it's a burning issue for me. It's the narrative that we have. It's the verbiage that we use. It was kind of like, even when Annika started it, it's like this whole idea, we're going to talk about this, and it is normalized, where there's a lot of people that really, it does trigger them, and there is a lot of trauma. But somehow I think that, and I'm going to ask you, what should the narrative sound like? If we're going to look at what Karen just said, right? Around, are we really safe in California? What kind of verbiage? How it's the idea that, a woman is raped versus a man raped her. I mean, it has a very different connotation, right? We talk about women and abortion, and we never talk about, it's really not possible to get pregnant without the participation of some body part of a male. I mean, I don't think it's possible for that to happen. And so the narrative that we use never really, that I hear, ever really brings that point up. The responsibility is always on the person who's going to make this decision or not make this decision. And then we kind of encourage, and I think I'd heard Annika say it a while ago, or maybe it was Karen, it's like this internalized misogyny, right? We kind of almost allow that kind of like this thing that Kelly has running down at the bottom, right? To just kind of run through our mind, because our conversation is about like women or what Aleena's talking about. If you don't want to do this, there's something wrong with the woman versus, I don't know, you guys might know another way to have a baby just by yourselves. I'm not positive, but usually I think you need a sperm in order for the egg to get fertilized, however that occurs, right? I'm not judging how that occurs. So that's my question. Because what Karen said, is there a different, how do we get the message out that we're not isolated in this, right? What should the narrative look like? And that's not to take this away from you. That's just my own burning question. So please don't get upset with me, Karen, for infringing on your space.
No. I think that's a really great question. And I think if I could answer you, I think, in my opinion, a big part of it is being more open to having this conversation about what is reproductive justice within community meetings and within like a broader populations, because it does need to be something that needs to be normalized. And we know that these rights can be taken away at any point. And so I think the most important thing is to make sure that people don't accept that, like, if it does get taken away, like, that's not okay. And so that we have a community that continues to organize and that continues to push for these rights that should be guaranteed at this point, but haven't yet.
Can I piggyback on that?
Do we have time? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and you'll be the last one, and then we can wrap up.
Okay. I was just, I really do think that if we call out what it is, which is the, misogyny, white supremacy, control, whatever label you want to put on it, but to call that out mixed with, like, really honing in on the fact that it's healthcare at the end of the day. And so to switch the narrative in that context, I think that was my answer.
All right. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, and with that, I want to turn it over to Kahleia, who's going to tell us how we can continue this work and how we can activate our communities to join us.
Yeah, so one way we can kind of engage our communities in this conversation is one, educating and speaking about it to them, to your friends, to your family, and just kind of making sure that everyone's educated. A lot of times people go into these conversations in these spaces without being educated, without kind of having a background and knowledge or an experience or someone who has an experience in this behind them. And it's important that that's shared, that you help these people learn and just be aware, because it will spread and it will become a community conversation if that does happen. Yeah, so it's an effort, and it's an effort that takes someone who is certainly passionate about the issue as well to kind of light the fire under other people so they are just as passionate, because this is an issue. It's a big one that affects every person that can reproduce, and it's important that they're understood, that they're heard, and that this is their narrative. This is about them, and they're not getting a say. And it's important that you let them know that we're fighting for you and that you do have a voice in this. So yeah, turn that back to Karen.
Yeah, and just an invitation for folks who are interested in continuing this dialogue to join one of our meetings. And I will let Sue let us know how to do that.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. One more. Stephanie, did you have an ask before we wrap this up?
Yes, and I don't know if some of you folks had realized that we had partnered with one of the local organizations here, a women's group, and they've done incredible work with supporting women and their children, and very intense situations. And so I wanted to ask if we could share some information in regards to their organization. It's called Strong-Hearted Native Women's, and you can find them on the web at strongheartednativewomen.org. And they're doing wonderful things for Native women and their children. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Steff. All right. Does anybody else have one last word before we wrap? I'm so excited. Does anyone have one last message, one last word, one last thought? Karen, do you have an ask for United We Dream? Kahleia, do you have an ask for the ACLU? Do you have any specific ask? As this is your space, just ask.
Sure. I could do a quick plug for United We Dream. Right now, we are continuing to push senators to ignore the parliamentarian and vote and include a pathway to citizenship within the reconciliation process. That would essentially mean a pathway to citizenship for immigrant youth like myself, TPS holders, farm workers, and essential workers. If this is something that you want to help us with, please text pathway to 877-877, and that will get you plugged into how to contact your senators and congressperson to let them know that there are people in the community who are concerned and want to make sure that there is a pathway for citizenship for immigrants this year.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have an ask? Aleena, we heard yours. And if you are interested, again, to join Aleena and her push for education, organizing, starting small in San Diego, there's a concern about the number of Afghani women, there are people that are going to arrive in Kansas, and are they prepared for the thousands that are coming to what we need to do nationally? You can contact the North County San Diego Women's March. If you go on our Facebook, it's a page. Just go on the Facebook page and say, hey, I'm real interested, and we'll get back to you and give you all the details that you need. All right. Is there any ask specific here, Kate, for the ACLU, or we're all okay? Because you both, Kahleia and Kate, are both ACLU. Annika, do you have an ask other than that we all meditate?
Before we wrap it up, I think that within this, kind of going back to that idea of bodily autonomy and our own role of self and sense of self in it, I suppose my ask would be for each individual not only to kind of slow down and sit with themselves and reflect on why you may have been numb to this or why you may have overlooked this, and to also really think about how this isn't an individual issue, and try to break down that individualized component that capitalism perpetuates, and to try to see this as a bigger community issue. And moving forward, trying to get tapped in with your local communities, bring your skills, reflect on what you can do and how you can be supportive, empowering to your own communities, and start to build the people in your communities. Because I can promise you that even in California, even though we think we're quote unquote safe, reproductive healthcare is not accessible to many people in this state as a result of finances, as a result of time, as a result of the work you have to do, as a result of like documentation status, as a result of many things. I can assure, and just within that, analyze the own privilege you sit in to be able to think that just because this doesn't affect me, this is no longer my worry. And again, break down that individualized component and sort of try to get back connected to your communities and physically get out and be with them.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for participating. Again, I just need to reiterate, I'm Sue Alderson. I'm the founder of the North County San Diego Women's March. What value is that we are as committed as we can be to bringing the voices of our community members forward. We want to give as many people a spade, as many people a platform. It's time for us to hear from people and their experiences and hear their stories and be able to use stories as a way to empower. And it's not that we're not fond of what our Congress people do and what our senators do, and we're real appreciative of anything that they push forward. But our space is really committed to the people within our communities and their organizing. So, Kelly, can I keep going, or this person is?
You can keep going. I was just getting it queued up on our way out. We have
thank you.
So we're going to have blessings coming out, but you do want to mention when our next North County San Diego Women's March is and all that.
Right. So the next meeting, we meet the first Thursday of every month. Please go to the North County San Diego Women, and it's WOMXN''S. We will let you know when the next meeting is. We're going to go up. We're going to ensure that all voices, all ages, as you can see from our roundtable discussion tonight, are going to be represented. Please join us. Again, it's reproductive justice. We're going to plan a virtual event and an in-person event. January 22nd is our day. We will continue to address issues of reproductive justice. We will start looking at how we can use our stories for people to be empowered. And so thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight. Thank you, Kate, Karen, Kahleia, Annika, Steff, and me, of course, and Aleena June for joining us tonight and sharing your information and your hearts and your time and your space. And with that, we will see you soon, because we will have more of these roundtable conversations coming. Remember, the first Thursday of the month, go to the North County San Diego Women's Facebook page, and we'll send you all the information you need. And thank you for joining us.
The next song I'm going to sing is The Water Song by Doreen Day and her grandson. This is a Ojibwe song to honor the water, and as water is life, and to honor the life givers who carry water for their little ones. I always have my cup of water when I sing this song, if I'm not actually at a body of water. Nibe gizage go gimigwechowe nimigo gijawe nimigo nibe gizage go gimigwechowe nimigo gijawe nimigo nibe gizage go gimigwechowe nimigo Gijageigo. Immigrant away, NiMiiPuu. Gijawe,